So what is the ultimate meaning of life for you?
The ultimate meaning of life depends on what you mean by it, obviously. Each one of us can make an ultimate meaning. Each one of us can have a private meaning, a purpose in our life, what we hope to achieve in our life. Or a biologist might say the ultimate meaning of life is the propagation of genes. That would be a very different kind of meaning. They're both true.
I suppose the basic question for me here is, what is the nature of ultimate reality? If ultimate reality is simply the universe, in some sense, or multiverse, that's one thing. And I am at a loss to understand how you get from simple atoms, elementary particles, and so on, to a brain, let alone a mind, the I, the person. And we don't understand what consciousness is, and so on. I don't begin to say, and I don't think scientists begin to see, how you can get to something that even understands the concept of meaning. But I can understand it if behind the universe, the ultimate reality is not impersonal matter and energy that somehow has produced all this stuff bottom up. I can understand it if it's top down, as well as partly bottom up, and that is that there is a God who is personal, who is good, who is the source of life and meaning, and who reaches out to me as a person, and who, in fact, far from stopping me doing science, encourages the development of the mind that he has given me. And so meaning to me has all kinds of dimensions, as you would agree with, in my family, with my wife and my children and my work and so on. But it's not bounded by the 10. It's not bounded by the death of the universe either. It's got an expanding horizon of hope. And that, to me, is the only thing that is worthy of the God that created this vast cosmos. That our lives are not going to be extinguished just like that. There is a beyond, and I can walk with confidence into that beyond because I have a real relationship that's got a firm basis with the God who invented it all. And therefore it seems to me that the meaning given by atheism and reductionism is very, very tiny. Now, of course, you'll come back immediately and say it's a question of truth. Of course it's a question of truth. But at least we can have a look at the different kinds of worlds that we represent. Because that business of it's tempting, it is terribly tempting. Do you ever get terribly tempted to believe that there is a God and that the kind of thing I'm saying is true?
I've said to you already that there are many things that would be very nice about it, but as you've just repeated, it doesn't make it true.
No, it doesn't.
I mean, you think you're going to survive your own death, I gather.
Yes, I do.
Yeah. I mean, but so you think that even though your brain dies, something else... I mean, at what point in evolution did that remarkable faculty emerge?
I haven't a notion. It's part of God has created human beings in his image.
What on earth does that mean? In his image? Do you think he looks like us?
No. That we have personality. That it's an anthropomorphism. But we are persons. God is a person, and therefore we can relate to him. That's what the whole business is about.
Was Homo erectus a person?
Well, I can't decide by looking at fossils whether there's a person or not.
But do you think it happened gradually? Do you think it happened gradually? I mean, or was there a moment when a child was born that was a person and its parents weren't?
My own feeling is that there was a point when God did something special, but it would be very hard to detect that from any scientific investigation.
So God suddenly kind of dived into the evolutionary process and said, right, from now on they're going to be persons.
Well, whether he dived into an evolutionary process or did it specially is an open question. I do believe in evolution as far as Darwin saw it, the variation and modification that we've been talking about. I'm not actually sure, but this is a vast topic now to begin.
Gentlemen, I think we digress.
Yeah. Okay.
The issue again is purpose.
I want to hear that ending. I want to hear whether he believes in evolution.
Well, I've said that I believe in what Darwin observed, But I'm not sure that the mechanism of mutation and natural selection can bear all the weight that's put on it. For example, producing consciousness and so on. I think there may be several points in the history of the universe where God did something special. But I'm not going to be over dogmatic on that tonight, because those aren't the places where I rest my faith in God. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
No, again, we still have a few minutes, but we're discussing this issue. Do you feel that you've discussed sufficiently the issues of purpose, human purpose? You're actually giving a lecture on that in 2 days, and also the issue of morality. Are you comfortable that you've discussed that?
Yeah, I think we should go to questions.
Okay. Well, very good. Yes?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, the first question is for Dr. Lennox, and it is, Professor Lennox. How do you explain the similarities between organized religions, and why do you feel that the Christian faith is in some way more viable than the others?
That's a question for me?
Yes, indeed.
How do I explain the similarities between organized religions? I think that when we look around the world, there are various aspects to any given religion, and one of the very important ones is the moral aspect. And as has been pointed out by many people, if you look around the world, you find a common moral pool. In fact, you mentioned this in your book. A common moral pool that people of all faiths or none will respond very similarly to the same kind of moral questions. Now, to me, the explanation for that is the one I've just given, that each person is a moral being made in the image of God. And therefore, as I look around the world, I would expect, whether people believe in God or not, that they've a roughly similar morality. So there are similarities at that level. But then you will get very big differences when it comes particularly to the question of the basis for a relationship with God. And that tends to diverge. There are some religions that say that a relationship with God must be based on human merit. And as many probably know, Christianity says the exact opposite, that the relationship with God comes through trusting Christ because of what he did through his cross and resurrection, and is not merit but is a gift. I don't know whether you want me to expand further on that, but that's basically
you've got a bit of time. Both of you do. If you
what was
could
the
take
second part of the question again?
Just what's so special about Christianity?
Yes. What distinguishes Christianity? Why do you feel that the Christian faith is in some way more viable than the other religions?
I see. Well, I think for me the question is, very aware of Richard sitting here to my right, is whether it's true or not. And Christ claimed to be the way, the truth, and the life, and either that's absurd nonsense or else it's true. Now, I'm convinced it is true. Why is it true? Well, if we take the three great monotheistic religions and their attitude to Christ, we'll find that one of them believes that he died and didn't rise. The other believes that he didn't die, and Christianity believes that he both died and rose again. Now, that's something that I feel that we can access by history. The second point is this, and it's probably the most important point. It's that it seems to me in a way that Christianity is not competing with other religions. Let me try and explain that. Because as I understand the New Testament, what Christ offers me is something that no other religion offers me. Many religions offer me a path, a moral path to follow, which may be excellent. But what Christianity offers me is a radical diagnosis, which some people react against. The fact that I find myself disjointed, I find myself, I don't even keep my own standards and so on. And I find also that the relationship with God has been broken, and there is need for repair, there's need for forgiveness. Now, in Christ, in his death and resurrection, I find that there's an adequate basis for forgiveness so that I can be certain of my relationship with God and know it. Now, I don't find that anywhere else. I find wonderful morality and all the rest of it. And I think it's very important that we respect people of other faiths. But if you ask me what makes the difference, that's the central one. There are many others.
Okay. To Professor Dawkins, do you think that there is no purpose in religion?
No purpose in religion. Well, as I said before, individuals have purposes, and many individuals have purposes that are deeply shot through, sometimes literally, with religion. There are people in the world, very large numbers of people, whose entire life is guided by religion. Everything they do is guided by religion. So the answer, of course, is yes, there are purposes in religion. I think that it is a tragedy that people waste their lives devoting it to such fanciful, imaginary purposes, but I can't deny that they do.
Over to Professor Lennox. If we accept that an omnipotent designer is responsible for our existence, then how do you explain the deficiencies in our design?
Well, of course, the question assumes that there are deficiencies. All design involves compromise with all kinds of different constraints and so on and so forth. So I think before I rush to say there are deficiencies in our design, I would need to know what the ultimate purpose of the designer was and all the rest of it. So it's very difficult to respond to that. I believe myself that the ultimate designer is God, but I also believe we live in a damaged universe, and so we see around us, alas, all kinds of things that are a result of, well, human evil as a result of the disjointedness of creation and so on and so forth. But that would lead us into a very much deeper question of the problem of moral evil and pain.
To Professor Dawkins, how do you explain the origin of the laws of physics?
I do not know the origin of the laws of physics, as I've said again and again. What I do know is that whatever they are, and I've said this again and again, whatever they are, it certainly doesn't help to propose that they were designed by a conscious intelligence, because that simply makes a bigger question than you've solved. Now, the laws of physics, but to break that down a little more, it has been suggested that the laws of physics are extremely fine-tuned, and that if they were any different, the universe as we know it wouldn't exist, stars wouldn't exist, chemistry wouldn't exist, biology wouldn't exist, and we wouldn't exist. And theists are tempted to say, therefore, the laws of physics must have been designed in such a way that they are exactly fine-tuned to bring us into existence. Once again, that is a non-explanation, because it leaves open the explanation for the designer. There are many physicists who explain that by saying, well, with the so-called anthropic principle, saying that we could only exist in a universe which has the right laws and the right constants to bring us into existence, and therefore the fact that we're talking about it determines that we must be in such a universe. That's the anthropic principle. There are versions of it which make it a bit more plausible. For example, the multiverse theory, that there are lots of different universes, that we live in a kind of bubbling foam of universes, and each bubble in the foam has a different set of laws of physics. The vast majority of those laws of physics are not conducive to giving rise to us. A tiny minority are conducive to giving rise to advanced life forms. And once again, the anthropic principle comes in. We could only exist, we could only be in one of those bubbles that has the necessary laws of physics to bring us into existence. And therefore, obviously, since we do exist, since we're talking about it, we must be in such a universe. I haven't answered the question, but what I hope I have done is to show that whatever else the answer is, it cannot be God.
Okay, gentlemen, now what I would like to do, I want to give you ample time for your closing remarks. And so we will begin with Professor Lennox. You may take 5 minutes, no more than 5 minutes, and then we will conclude with Professor Dawkins. He will have the last word.
Has science buried God? I think not. Science arose in the 16th and 17th centuries, a meteoric rise that historians of science have looked at and come to the conclusion that one of the main motors driving the rise of science was faith in God. So far from belief in God being a science stopper, it was the thing that caused science to rise in the first place, understandably so, because people had a basis for believing that the universe was rationally accessible, and so they could do their science, which is apparently one of the reasons given by Needham, the famous sinologist in Oxford, when he looked at China and asked the question, why did science not develop in this way in China? And in the end, although he was a Marxist, he came to the conclusion that it was because of the Christian background. So I'm not ashamed of being both a scientist and a Christian. And I suppose that the major argument that points, doesn't prove, but points towards God is that this universe is a universe in which science can be done. The fact that the laws are there. Richard honestly says he doesn't know where they come from. They come from the logos, the mind that is behind this universe, that has created it by his power and for his glory. And therefore doing science, like Galileo and Kepler suggested, doing mathematics, is to discover the secrets of the universe in the language in which God has written them. The other reason why I reject atheism as an explanation is it doesn't even, to my mind, begin to rise to account for the rationality which lies behind science. Also, I think that the Christian faith, which I unashamedly espouse, is not anti-scientific. And I would plead for the same attention to be paid to history as is paid to science itself. I find very unconvincing arguments that trip very lightly over things that historians do accept, which mean that we should take the scholarship that has to do with the existence and the resurrection of Christ very seriously indeed. The other big area, which we didn't discuss in great detail tonight, is that if science has buried God, it seems to me there's something else that lies before us, and that is, where are we going to get our morality from? Because Richard has written in one of his books that the universe is just like we'd expect to find it. If at bottom there's no good, there's no evil, there's no justice. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. That seems to me to be a frightfully deterministic universe. And it troubles me to this extent, because it seems to me that on the one hand, the new atheists, of which Richard is a leader in the world, are trying in a way to hold on to the values that were given to them by Christianity, actually. And I would like to emphasize that, because in many of these books nothing good is said about religion. But Jürgen Habermas, who's not a Christian of course,
30 seconds.
Recently said that the foundations of our legal system and our education and our morality in Europe are based on Christianity. Everything else is postmodern chatter. What worries me is this, that can you really retain these good moral values and espouse atheism? Hard atheists like Nietzsche and Camus would say you can't. Eventually it will lead to madness. And some people are suggesting that that is actually what's going to happen. And I have a question for Richard Dawkins. Is his world the world of Peter Singer, where in the end moral values get so eroded by a naturalistic framework that Peter Singer can say a newborn baby is of no more value than a pig or a dog or a chimpanzee? Is that the world to which the new atheism is leading us?
Peter Singer is one of the most moral people I know, and when he says something like that, it is based upon a very rigorous moral philosophic reasoning. He's interested in suffering, and his point is there that a newborn baby, or certainly a human fetus, may be less capable of suffering than, say, a full-grown pig. That seems to me to be an entirely rational point of view, at least an entirely defensible point of view. However, it was tossed in at the last minute, and I don't want to take all my time dealing with that. John, you quoted me as saying the universe has at bottom no good, no evil, and you said it has exactly the properties we'd expect if there was nothing there. You said that sounds horribly deterministic. Well, another way of putting that would be to say that the universe is horribly rational, horribly intelligible. And one of the main points you've been making is precisely that we live in an intelligible universe. And that's one of the things that we need to explain, and you think it needs a God in order to explain it. What I would like to know is, what would an unintelligible universe look like? How could any creature live as we live? How could any creature have evolved and survived in a universe that didn't have that kind of mathematical intelligibility? It's the anthropic principle again. Just as we could only be living in a universe that has stars, because you need stars to make molecules, so we could only have survived in a universe where there is rationality. I cannot conceive of what an irrational, unlawful universe would look like. Now, science doesn't know everything. So it's one of the glories of science that we know what we don't know, and we work on what we don't know, try to shrink what we don't know. It's hard work. We don't cop out by saying, oh, well, if you come to a difficult problem, magic must have done it, or God must have done it. No, we don't say that. We say, right, that's a problem to be solved. It may not be solved this century, it may be solved in the following century, or the one after that. But we don't just lie down and give up and say, oh, well, it must be magic because we don't yet understand it. I would hold up Darwin as a model for the whole of science, because before Darwin came along, the whole of life, the complexity of life, the beauty of life, the elegance of life, the apparent design of life looked like magic. And everybody thought it was magic. Everybody thought that God did it. It's so complicated, it's so elegant. Now, that was the really big problem. That was a far bigger problem than the problem of the origin of life, than the problem of the origin of the cosmos. Darwin solved that problem. All scientists now know that. Darwin solved that problem, and in so doing, he provided us with a sort of parable that don't even think about giving up, because if ever there was a time to have given up, it was in the case of biology. Because biology really was a difficult problem, a hard problem. Darwin solved it. Now we have one or two other problems remaining, like the origin of life, like the origin of the cosmos, the origin of the laws of physics. No doubt that there are physicists here who can point to yet other ones. Darwin provides us with a lesson. It says, don't give up, because if Darwin could solve it for the really difficult problem, which was life, then we have every hope that science will solve it for the other problems in the end. And even if it doesn't, even if science doesn't solve all problems ever, that is still no grounds for saying, oh, well, magic did it.